Hi everyone! Today's Ancient and Medieval Adventures lesson will be all about the history of Western alchemy from antiquity to the Renaissance. When you hear the word alchemy, what do you think of? For most people, what comes to mind is probably mysterious magic and potions, or maybe the Philosopher's Stone. In fact, alchemy used to be a real science that was practiced by ancient and medieval scholars who were searching for a real way to transform lead, or another common substance, into gold. In ancient times, alchemists also tried to learn as much as they could about the natural world. It was an early form of what we now know as the study of chemistry, or the way that chemicals and substances interact with each other. Although archaeologists don't exactly know where alchemy was first practiced in the world and how it originated, some of our earliest records of alchemy existing as a profession are in Egypt during the time of Alexander the Great, 2,300 years ago. The oldest surviving written record of alchemy, called the Leiden Papyrus, was written about 600 years later. These writings describe many recipes for making false gold and silver, as well as instructions for finding pure metals and rare gemstones in nature. Although alchemists were primarily interested in the transmutation of metals, they also explored the properties of other items from the natural world. They would observe the properties of metals and other materials in a variety of settings, like when exposed to flames, or water, or when mixed with other substances. Although they didn't always work with metals, alchemists believed that it would be easier to turn another metal into gold than some other substance. Although they didn't create gold that we know of, many of these experiments ended up having very artistic results. Several paint pigments were discovered in this manner by exploring the properties of various minerals and plants. In the 8th century CE, the practice of alchemy spread to the Middle East. Although it slowed down in the Western world, it continued to advance in the caliphates and kingdoms of the Islamic world. Jabir ibn Hayyan was known as one of the most important Islamic alchemists and was the first to use proper laboratory documentation in his experiments, so that the results of his work could be repeated and better understood. Although Jabir and his fellow alchemists did not discover how to transform lead into gold, they did document many chemical reactions between other substances that advanced modern science. Today, Jabir ibn Hayyan is known by some as the father of chemistry. 300 years later, in the 11th century CE, alchemy was reintroduced to Europe. Because of the Crusades, as well as people living in larger European cities increasing their trade with merchants in the East, scientific ideas and scholars began to migrate back into Europe. Alchemy became increasingly popular over the next centuries as more books and ideas from the Islamic world were translated into European languages. The works of the Islamic alchemist Al-Razi were particularly important, as he had been the first to discover both sulfuric acid and ethanol. European scholars wanted to learn what people like Al-Razi and Jabir had been studying and bring these advanced studies to their own institutions. In this period, European alchemists began to write and distribute their own research and books about what they had been learning. By the 14th century CE, the practice of alchemy had become more widespread throughout Europe than ever before. Thomas Norton, an English alchemist, wrote a book called The Ordinal of Alchemy, which described his experiences as an alchemist. However, as widespread as alchemy was, only a small portion of the population was actually educated enough to read and do research on their own, and many of the people who were literate in that era belonged to the Catholic Church, which generally frowned upon alchemical studies. Let's take a minute and look at one of the most famous medieval alchemical names. You may know of Nicolas Flamel if you have read or watched Harry Potter. Nicolas Flamel was the name of a real man who lived in France from 1330 to 1418. He was a scribe and manuscript seller. We don't know much about the real Flamel's life. About 300 years after his death, a text emerged in France which claimed that the long-dead Flamel had actually secretly been a wildly successful alchemist who had succeeded in achieving the two goals of alchemy, making the Philosopher's Stone, which turns metal into gold, and finding immortality in the elixir of life, which also comes from the stone. Wait a second, the Philosopher's Stone? Isn't that from Harry Potter too? No. In fact, the earliest known mention of the Philosopher's Stone was by the Greek philosopher Zosimus of Panopolis around 300 CE. Many alchemists believe that the Philosopher's Stone's history goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. Later alchemists based their search for the stone on Greek philosophical ideas. Although it is highly unlikely that the real Nicolas Flamel actually unlocked the secret of the Philosopher's Stone, his story remains an intriguing mystery to historians and scientists alike. But let's get back on track. Because of the widespread influence of the Church, which viewed alchemy as mysterious and possibly dangerous, alchemy was banned in many different parts of Europe. The Church considered alchemy to be a form of dark magic, as users were changing the properties of nature and altering the world as God created it. Some alchemists were also using the craft to create false gold items, like coins and jewelry, and pass them off as real gold. This made the users rich, but also took money away from the real goldsmiths and coin producers who were trying to make a living. For these reasons, alchemy once again faded into secrecy in Europe. The study of alchemy continued to evolve and eventually emerged again in the form of chemistry in the modern period. Today, people continue to search for ways to create their own natural medicines and new substances. As we wrap up this lesson, let's review the main points we learned. Alchemy has existed for thousands of years as people try to discover the secret of creating gold and eternal life. Alchemy has always been closely linked to the study of the natural sciences and the properties of nature, and not everyone who studied alchemy in history had good intentions. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check out our other Mage Warts camps for more fun magical content.